Okay, so yesterday we were discussing the following halacha. We learned 2 days ago that even though a poil, while he's harvesting the grapes, he's allowed to eat grapes, he's not allowed to dip the grapes into salt, because v'loy anovim v'dover acher. What would be the issue with dipping the grapes into salt? The issue would be is it gives him an appetite. It makes those grapes more appetizing. That he'll be able to eat much more than the norm. For Zoivite, we're not forcing the balabais to provide that. The problem was that halacha came under fire. So the Gemara said that we have a brisa that seems to contradict that. Ramini, hasoiches apoil la'ader ulakashkesh tachas hazeisim. You hired somebody to do work not by the Gemar Malacha. We already learned if it's not by the Gemar Malacha, you have no right to eat anything. Hareza lo yoichal, period. But socher livtzor, but if you hired somebody to do the Gemar Malacha, to do the actual harvesting, then or socher limtzor, socher lilkoit, these are all different expressions of harvesting at different types of fruits. Hareza oichel upater. He does have the right to eat, and when he eats, he has no chiyuv trumas amaishus. He's eating it out in the field. Why is it potter? Why don't we look at like a mekach? We learned at Midrabanan when somebody buys produce from somebody in their field, even though the owner is not yet triggered for a chiyuv meiser, but by buying it, that creates an achshevei, and there should be a chiyuv meiser. Dr. Bryce Shatayra zichsa lahed. This is not part of the remuneration package. This isn't part of the pay package. This is a separate gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them. It doesn't have the achshevei as a transaction that was purchased. What about kotats? So kotats means I made up with the balabais as part of my pay package to be able to eat. Well, if I'm entitled to it without making up, why would I make such a deal? It's mine without any special conditions. So Tosfos discusses it could be in places where I wouldn't be entitled. For instance, let's say I was hired la'ader or lakashkesh, things that normally wouldn't allow me to eat. There we made up that I'm going to be able to eat anyway. So then, the poil could eat one at a time. But shtayim lo yoichel, he's not allowed to eat two at a time, because then you'll have the problem of achshevei. It's going to be a problem of trumas and maishus. So if he's eating one at a time, that's not enough to trigger a chiyuv trumas and maishus. But if he eats two at a time, that will trigger a chiyuv maishus. And the soifes b'melech v'yoichel, and he could dip it into salt. Now we're not sure legabe what halacha is the brisa saying at this point. You dip it into salt. Is it regarding the meiser problem that it won't trigger a chiyuv meiser, or does it mean it won't impact his contract? So therefore, the Gemara probes. Ahaya, ilema seifa. If it's going on the case of the seifa, where we made up that I can eat, there the soifes b'melech v'yoichel is completely irrelevant. Even the kotzats, once we make up that I'm allowed to eat whatever I want to eat, I'm not going to do whatever I want with it. Kol heichi the boy leichel. I can eat any way I want. I can dip into ketchup, mustard. I can do whatever I want with it. We made a deal. I get to eat. The only type of eating that's regulated is the eating that you have directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the special pasuk that grants it. But if you made a deal that's part of your pay package and you can eat whatever you want. So therefore, that's for sure not what the Bryce is addressing with the Seifis B'melech V'yoichel. Elalav Reisha. It must be going under Reisha. When there was no deal and you're allowed to eat because the Torah says a poil is allowed to eat, and the Bryce comments for Seifis B'melech V'yoichel. So you see that you're even allowed to eat with dipping it into salt, which is a direct steer to what we have assumed until now, to what we learned up until now. On that, Abai says, Amar Abai Loi Kasha. We're not discussing the Shaila Le'inyin, Shemishbet Le'inyin if I'm allowed to eat or not. Avada L'Gabbadah is not allowed to eat. But here the question is kan ba'oretz, kan b'chutz la'oretz. It depends on where you were. Lagabi trumas and maisros, because we know in Eretz Yisrael there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to take trumas and maisros. In chutz la'oretz there's only a chiyuv d'rabbanan. So be'eretz, if it's in Eretz Yisrael where there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to take trumas and maisros, if you dip it into salt, even though it's one, that creates a chashivas in and of itself, and therefore you would have to be mafish trumas and maisros. But Eretz kava svisa, but chutz la'oretz loy kava svisa. But in chutz la'oretz it wouldn't. Why? Because it's only with Rabbanan. Right, Rabbi, that makes no sense at all, because we know anytime the Rabbanan make a takana, they mirror exactly what the deraisa is. So if midaraisa dipping it into salt is kavet lemaiser, midarabbanan dipping it into salt should be kavet lemaiser. Amarava mi kamiti de be'eretz kava svisa midaraisa uvechuta la'aretz loy kava svisa at all. So Rava rejects Abayi's pshat. Elo Amar Rava his own pshat. Bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. Saiv it's in Eretz Yisrael. Saiv it's chutz la'aretz. They have the same halacha, whether it's ma'aseh deraisa or ma'aseh derabbanan. Chada loy kava svisa. Party kava svisa. If you eat one at a time and you're dipping it into salt, that would not create a chiyuv of meiser. It would not trigger a chiyuv meiser. But if there were two, then it would trigger a chiyuv meiser. But if it was kotzatz, what if we made up that I get to eat as many pairs as I want? So then, bein safas, bein loy safas, I don't even eat safas here at all. Safas doesn't play a role. Because regardless, achas, I'm allowed to eat, and shtayim, I'm not allowed to eat. So kavatz, so svisa will not play any role if it was part of my salary package. Because, as we said earlier, svisa only makes a difference if I do it with two, not with one. By kotzatz, I can't eat two anyway, because just eating two when it's kotzatz creates a chiyuv to take off trumas and maishus like a mechira. But if it's loy kotzatz for loy safas, what if I'm not taking because of a tanai in my employment? Rather, I'm taking based on the deraisa right that a poil has to eat, and you didn't dip anything into salt. The workers are even allowed to eat two at a time, and there won't be a trigger for maishras. Safas. But if he dipped it into salt, then achas oichel. He can still eat one at a time. Shtayim lo yoichel, but he can't eat two at a time without triggering the chiyuv meiser. How could he eat it? Didn't we learn that if you dip it into salt, you're not allowed to take it anymore? True. So the Gemara adds, v'afal gav de notal rishus mi balabais. Even if the balabais gave him rishus to take more, so it's not kotzatz, the balabais gave him rishus to take more and to dip it into salt, you still have a problem that if he dips two into salt, it's going to make it into a chiyuv tevel, to a chiyuv meiser, the itfelu meiser, the kavos svisa. So very, very simple. So svisa. So when the Brisa says v'soifechs b'melech v'yoichal, that means if he's eating one at a time, and the balabais gives him reshus to dip it into salt, even though the Brisa doesn't grant him that, it will not create a trigger for meiser. But even if the balabais gave him reshus to eat with salt, if he does that with two, that will be koivayat lemeiser, and now this poil will not be able to eat without separating trumas and maishras. Now, where do we see that the number two is the key number? The tagti tekavos v'sat minolam. Amarav masna the amakra ki kivtzam or ki kavtzam kamir gayrana. You gather them the pile in the gayrin. In order to gather, you need to have two. You can't gather one. So you see, two is the critical number that make it into a gayrin for mice. Sorry? It could be more than two as well, but minimum two. Right. Tanu Rabban. We learned in a brisa. Parais hamarachos b'tfua. So now we're going to get into nitty-gritty details of when it's usher to muzzle an animal and when it's mutter. So if you have parais hamarachos b'tfua, now the norm of sidra de pas is that they thresh, then they winnow, then they take this grain, they grind it, and they make it into flour, and then they make it into dough, and then they make it into bread. But what if that was not the end game? What if the end game, Dr. Rashi, was sheshorin sa'arin b'mayim? They would soak the barley in water. Then they would put them into the oven to dry them out. And after that, v'dashin oisan v'parais lahasa klipasan. That was called chushla. So it wasn't made to continue on in the Sidur de Pas. They made these kernels, and this was the process. So parais hamarachos betua. I'm sorry. I don't know, maybe it's a nash. They snacked on it. So that's one thing. Or the hadashos petruma uva meiser. Or if they are doing the threshing on truma and meiser, which is not the typical way to do things, because when do you normally take trumas and meisers? After the chiyuv tevel is triggered, after it's already threshed and winnowed and in the goyret, right? But here he obviously did something not normal, and he made it truma even before it had a chiyuv, and that works. So in these cases, einoi over mishum bal sakson. There is no iser of loisachsim sarbidishay. Why not? Rashi einoi over loisachsim. Mechasa is the first case where it wasn't going to continue on in the Sidur de Pas. Mishum de gemar malachtan lamaiser misas disha. Because when is the gemar malacha for meiser? Misas disha. And therefore, the animals. Why am I getting confused there? The gemar malacha l'maiser misas disha. Here, the gemar malacha would be mishas disha. So if the gemar malacha is misas disha, there shouldn't be an isur l'sachsa. Truma or meiser. Why, if it's truma or meiser, why over there do we say there's no isur l'sachsa? The stam daish lav b'truma u'meiser mishtoikra. When the Torah says l'sachsa mishtor b'dishay, the Torah is clearly referring to chulin, because the norm is at this stage it will only be chulin. Then truma meiser stam ela min hamiruach ve'elach. Normally, the only time there's a chiyuv trumas and meisers is when it's already winnowed. So it's very not normal to have trumas and meisers at that stage that require disha. So we say the pasuk that says leisachsoim is pashtus not referring to trumas and meisers. Okay, gavaldik. So the halach is these two cases do not have the isur daraisa of leisachsoim shor b'disha. He talked to Gemara weiter. Avo mipnei maris ha'ayin lamaisa. If people see you working with an animal that's muzzled, it doesn't look good. It's chshad. So the halach is maybe bull me'oisay hamin. You should take bull is a molek of a handful. You should take a handful of produce from that min, put it into a bag, and hang it around his neck, so that it looks like you're feeding him. V'toiloloi betraskelin shevapiyah. So really, there's no problem with disha, but so people shouldn't think you're doing the door with chasima. In order that people shouldn't think you're doing chasima, put a bag of feed in front of him. You do better. Maybe karshinim with tayla. You give him oats. I think karshinim are oats, right? Or no, maybe Shiva shows those. Well, what is karshinim? It's one of them. What? Vetch. Okay. Look, karshinim. The best food to serve an animal are karshinim. So it does not be the same in as long as you're feeding him. And we're going to have a discussion later on. Is there a problem with lesachsoim if you're feeding him something that's even better for him, right? It's just lesachsoim. Well, that's what Rabbi Shimon Yochai says. He clearly holds that if you're feeding the animal something that's better for the animal, that will negate the problem of lesachsoim. Or many frakti we have a stira. So the first halacha by Merachsois, there is no issue. But the problem is the next halacha that the Brisa says. If you're threshing and truma meiser, you are over, which is a direct stira, because our Brisa says and this Brisa says you are over. That is the kasha that the Gemara is going to deal with. Now the Brisa says in another halacha, but Nachri Adosh v'Parasa Shal Yisrael. But if the Nachri is using the Parah Shal Yisrael and he's muzzling it, Einay over Mishum Bal Sachson. there the Yisrael is not over because the Nachri is making chasima on this animal. Rashi speaks out. Rashi speaks out that whose product is he threshing? In other words, what is the animal being used for? Is the guy working for the Yid and threshing the Yid's animal? Threshing the Yid's tefillah? So Rashi says no. This is speaking where you're threshing the guy's tefillah. So the guy used my animal and he muzzled it and he's threshing his own tefillah. Tosha says that's not a chiddush. Is a guy not allowed to eat nevela? A guy is allowed to eat nevela. So why should there be a chiddush in that? So Tosha learns even if he's threshing the Yid's tefillah. Okay? The Yisrael Adash B'Parasha Shal Nachri, if the Yisrael is the one who is doing the chasima, over Mishum Baltach. So let's get back to our sugya. Kasha Truma, Kasha Meiser. The first brisa, both by Truma and Meiser, says there's no Isra of Loisach. Right? And the second brisa says both by Truma and by Meiser that there is an Isra of Loisach. Zok Gemara, Bishlama Truma Loikat. The Mela Truma is not a stira. Why? Kan Betruma, the first brisa that says that there is no Isra to make chasima when they're threshing, that's real true. Can be gedula truma. But the brisa that says it's usher is gedula truma, which is only truma midrabana. Truma midaraisa, yeah, the Torah didn't say leisachsim for it. But truma the rabbanon can't make it into truma and then tell us to violate it. So therefore, the second brisa is speaking about gedula truma. What is gedula truma? Gedula truma means if I take grain that's truma and I plant it. What about the stuff that grows? Me'ikradin, the stuff that grows, is regular chulin. But the Rabbanon said you have to treat it like truma. Why? Because Rashi speaks out. Because we're afraid. Let's say a Yisrael has truma, and he doesn't want to give it to the kohen. He wants to get around it. So he plants it. He's scot-free now. He could totally bypass the kohen. Or what if the kohen has truma tameya? All he's allowed to do is burn it. He wants to get better use out of it. So he wants to plant it. So the question is, Lamaisa, what's the problem? A Yisrael who plants it, it's completely legal. And well, yeah, but when he picks it, it starts again. It's tevel again. Yeah. So the problem is, what's wrong with it? Why did the Rabbanon want to prevent that from happening? Why did the Rabbanon want to prevent the kohen from planting the truma? The reason why they did is because now it's lying around. If it's lying around, if truma tamei is lying around by a kohen or a truma Torah is lying around by Yisrael, what if by mistake somebody eats it? There's a chiv misa. So we don't want it lying around. We want you to get rid of it right away. By allowing you to plant it, that means we're going to allow you to keep it. You're going to hold on to it until the next planting season. We want to get rid of it as soon as possible. So let's see Rashi. Gedula truma, shezara, you planted it. The gidla, and it grew, hagidula and truma midrabanan. Whatever grew is truma midrabanan. There's echad mishmoin aser davar, sherabu beishamai and basil b'tzias Shabbos. This is one of the 18 things that we pass on like beishamai over basil. Even the lav truma midaraisa, since it's not really truma, karina be dayishtama. So therefore, when the Torah says lesachim sharbidishai, the Torah is referring to that as well. So that's famfresh is steer and truma. Alamaiser meiser kasha. How are you going to explain why the first brisa says that there's no Israel lesachim on meiser, and the second brisa says there is lesachim on meiser? And if you want to try the same territory as before, v'chitema meiser namalei kasha. Can be meiser, can be geduli meiser. That won't work because there's no gzeir on geduli meiser. Geduli meiser is a regular chulin, so of course there'll be initial lesachim. Bishlam gedula truma gedula truma midrabanan has a din of truma. Ela geduli meiser chulininu. It's regular chulin. It's nan. And now if it's regular chulin, I don't need a brisa to tell you that there's a chiyuv lesachim. It's regular chulin. It's nan. Gedulei tevel, v'gedulei meiser sheni chulin. So we have a problem. Why in one brisa does the Tana say that there's no Ishalei Sachsim from Meiser, and in the other brisa there is an Ishalei Sachsim? Eloloi Kasha. Ha b'Meiser Rishon, ha b'Meiser Sheni. Let's say the brisa that says that there is an Ishalei Sachsim. The second brisa is speaking by Meiser Rishon, which belongs to the Levi. Ha b'Meiser Sheni, which is Mammon Gavoya. It's a Mammon Gavoya, that there will not be the Isser of Loi Sachsim. Zogt the Gemara Viter. Zogt the Gemara Viter. V'boisem, or you could say, Havab Ma'asher Sheni. Side the first brisa, and side the second brisa is speaking by Ma'asher Sheni. But like Kasha Harab Meir Harab Yehuda. There's a machloikis between your Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is Ma'aser Sheni Mammon Gavaya, and therefore there won't be an Isha Loisachsoim, or is Ma'aser Sheni Mammon Hedjit, and therefore there is an Isha Loisachsoim. Har Meir Amar Ma'aser Mammon Gavayahu, and therefore there should not be an Isha Loisachsoim. Har Rabbi Yehuda Amar Ma'aser Sheni Mammon Hedjitu, and therefore there will be an Isha Loisachsoim. Right, the Gemara. Hey Chadami, how did you have? We already answered this a long time ago, but now the Gemara is raising it. How do you have Trumas and Maestris at such an early stage before it was even threshed? Gemara Kagoyin Chek Dimai Bishibol. It's speaking where you have already separated Trumas and Maestris even before you had to. Okay, so let's stop for one moment, because when we started this Gemara, we said right off the bat, Rashi told us the reason why there is no Isser Loisachsim or Trumas and Maestris, because B'Pashtus, the Torah is not referring to that anymore, right? The Torah is not referring to something at such an early stage. But at this point, when it comes to Meiser, we are saying that the Torah is considering such an early stage. Because when we said, Haba Truma, Haba Meiser Darban, Haba Meiser Rishon, Haba Meiser Sheni, we're saying by Meiser Rishon, there will be an Isser of Loisachsim. You normally don't have Meiser to the early stage. So you see the Gemara was, because of the problem with Meiser, the Gemara was forced to reject that original theory. So if the Gemara rejects that original theory, that the Pasuk can't be talking about such an early stage of Truma, so therefore there's no Isser Loisachsim, that's not true anymore. So we have to go back now to understand why is it that by Truma, there's no Isser Loisachsim, because the Torah is referring to that stage. So Rashi addresses that. Rashi addresses that in a sort of clandestine fashion. He slips it in. So let's see Rashi inside how he deals with this question. Are over here? Okay, I think we're over here. Maman Gavaya. So once we already are playing ball with Meiser, and we're saying that there would be an Isser Loisachsim by Meiser, so we've already rejected our original theory that the Torah and the Ted Loisachsim cannot be referring to Meiser, because it's already, but Loisachsim is too early of a stage for Meiser to occur. Maman Gavaya, Veloy Karina Bebedisha. It's not in your Disha, because the Meiser is Maman Gavaya. So now what are we going to do with Truma? So here Rashi addresses that. The Gabi Truma, what are we going to have to answer? I mean, it's funny, the Gemara didn't bring it up. Rashi brings it up. The Gabi Truma Misukma Shoisha Parashal Yisrael. We'll have to learn that it was speaking by a Parashal Yisrael. Sha'asar La'achila Truma. You're not allowed to feed the para of a Yisrael Truma. Ta'filu imdash ba'koyin. Even if the koyin is doing the work, the animal is not allowed to eat. The Tanya koyin shesachar param Yisrael, aval pi shemizayno iseh alav, even though the koyin is responsible to feed the animal, lo yachilena karshine truma. He's not allowed to feed the animal of Yisrael with karshine truma. So therefore, there's not going to be an Isser Loisachsim, because he's not allowed to feed a truma, and that's how we'll have to explain it. So really, there is an Isser Loisachsim, but there's an overriding problem. Loisachsim won't overrule the halacha that the Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma, or the animal of a Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma. So that was sort of snuck in on the side. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Frag the Gemara, let's think about this. Threshing, you're in the middle of threshing. You don't thresh in the middle of a city. Threshing occurs outside the city. So frag the Gemara Ula Rabbi Yehuda, Haboy Chayma. According to Rabbi Yehuda, what are we saying? That Meiser is Mammon Hedjit. And if Meiser is Mammon Hedjit, there's an Isser of Loisachsim. If Meiser is Mammon Hedjit, there's an Isser Loisachsim. But the problem is, if there's an Isser Loisachsim, Zok Gemara, Kivan the Shem Meiser Alav, Rabbi Yehuda, Nihinami the Mammon Hedjit, even though it's Mammon Hedjit, and therefore there should be an Isser Loisachsim, but they can't eat it anyway, because you're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni. You're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni out of Yerushalayim. So how could you say you're not allowed to muzzle him? You have to muzzle him, because you're not allowed to let the animal eat the Meiser Sheni. It's not in Yerushalayim. Haboy Chayma. You're not allowed to eat Ma'aser Sheni out of Yerushalayim. So Yosy lav lo sachsoim. How could you take the lav of lo sachsoim, which says don't muzzle the animal, let it eat, v'dochi lav lo sucha lechol b'sharecha? The same thing Rashi said a moment ago, like Abi Truma, the animal of Israel can't eat Truma, so we have to overrule lo sachsoim, because lo sachsoim cannot be a license to be over Isser of feeding your animal Truma. So to lo sachsoim cannot be a heter to overrule the fact that you're not allowed to have your animal or yourself eat Ma'aser Sheni out of Yerushalayim. Yes, in the metro, in downtown Metro Yerushalayim, that's not where this threshing occurred. But there was a little area that they added around the perimeter of Yerushalayim, which was still fields, but it was still considered in the perimeter of the city of Yerushalayim. So it's a place where threshing would normally occur, yet it's still within the walls of Yerushalayim, where it would be allowed to eat Ma'aser Sheni, and that's what we're discussing here. As Rashi says, Beis Pagi, Hekav Chizon Yerushalayim, the outer perimeter of Yerushalayim, Shaisifu Olav, they added to it, Kari Beis Pagi. It was called Beis Pagi. So you have a case where there was a threshing area within the perimeter of Yerushalayim. Or I can offer you another teretz. Lekasha, kan b'maiser vadai, kan b'maiser demai. The brisa that says there's no Isser lo sachsoim is maiser vadai. But the brisa that says that there isn't Isser chasima, it's maiser demai. Maiser demai, remember we said that you're not, it's only a chumrah. Really, me'ikra din, we assume that it took maiser. So if this is only a chumrah d'Rabbanan to treat it like maiser, that chumrah d'Rabbanan doesn't change its status. It's still personal, private to wheat, and therefore the Isser of lo sachsoim would apply. So the brisa that says that there's no Isser lo sachsoim is real maiser. The brisa that says there's isn't Isser lo sachsoim, the second brisa is speaking with maiser d'Rabbanan. As Rashi says, the les element d'Rabbanan. If you buy wheat from an Amaretz, the Rabbanan were mechayev the buyer to be mafresh ma'aser sheni because could be he didn't take the ma'asers. That's only midrabbanan. Now that you have this distinction between ma'aser demai and ma'aser vadai, now we have an easy territory for truma as well. Truma nami lakasha kan betrumas vadai kan betrumas demai. Trumas demai is not really truma. That's not a good teretz because bishlam and ma'aser demai ika. There is such a thing of ma'aser demai. El trumas demai miika. They were never mechayiv you to be mafresh truma again. They're only mechayiv you to be mafresh ma'aser. So at Tanya we learned af hu bitel esavidu. We're talking about Yoichlin Kohen Gadol. He was mevato vidui ma'aseris. Why? Because Rashi tells us because part of vidui ma'aser is you say is bi'arti hakodesh min abayis the gam nasatev leLevi. I gave my ma'aser to the Levi. The problem is at that point in history there was a knas. Ezra made a knas and he took ma'aser away from the Leviim and he gave it to the Kohanim because many of the Leviim didn't come back up with him when he went to Eretz Yisrael again. So because of that, how could you say bi'arti min hakodesh we got the Levi if we don't give it to the Levi anymore? So he said, let's not say it at all. And the Gazer al Hadmai, they also made a gzeira that Demai has to be, you have to separate Meiser again. Why did he do that? He did a survey to see how people were adhering to the rules of Trumas and Meisers. And his results were, so you can't say you have Truma of Demai, because there's no such thing as Truma of Demai, because you don't have to separate Truma for Demai. Kan betrumas meiser vadei and kan betrumas meiser demai. You're right. There's no such thing as truma, but trumas meiser there is because once we are mechayiv to separate meiser, then you'll also be mechayiv to separate the truma from the meiser. It's that truma that we're referring to. Could be that's why the Gemara didn't speak out Rashi's teretz earlier because the Gemara is settling here across the board on the teretz of trumas meiser versus trumas demai. Beautiful. So now we have some more rules about it only applies to your truma, to your produce. It doesn't apply to the Rabbeinu Shalom's produce. Now we have another question. This loisachsoim, what is the reason why the Torah said loisachsoim? Because we just referred to Rav Shimon Yochai, who said if you're going to feed the animal, better feed. There's no problem with loisachsoim. So boy minei merab sheishes. The animal clearly, the food that he was eating from what he was threshing was definitely not agreeing with it, and the animal had terrible diarrhea from the food that it was threshing. So maybe there we could waive the problem of loisachson. Mao, mishum de lahu is the reason why the Torah said loisachson, because it's good for the animal to eat food. And this food is not good. So maybe the Isser of loisachson would be suspended. It has nothing to do with what's good for it or not. The chazum mistira. I'm not supposed to be eating nash and chocolate, but when I see it and I can't eat it, it causes me pain. So the behemoth doesn't have the sense to know. Madach, a human doesn't have the sense to know that the piece of kugel isn't good for him. The behemoth also doesn't have the sense. Well, maybe I'm the behemoth. Maybe I'm the behemoth. But it does it anyway. So it's still painful. The animal is seeing all this kishmaka kugel and kishka and cholent and all the delicacies of the kiddush, and you're not allowed to eat it. Causes him pain. So you're still not allowed to mazel. So that is the shayla. Amul Rab Sheshes 22. We learned earlier from Rab Shimon ben Yochai. What did he say? Maybe karshinin v'talila shakarshinim yafis la minakoil shmamino mishin demaila lahu shmamino. So at the end of the day, there will not be an Israel Sachsaim if you're feeding the animal something else that's even better for it. So that's why it's not usher that you're being mitzayir yourself that you're not eating the kugel if they serve vegetables.
I was once at a project you mentioned. The blind man there, he had a seeing eye dog.
Right.
And eye dog by the kiddush, it was having a good time.
Oh, really? Okay. Ipoilu. Ma'u sheyomer adam l'nochri chasoim parosi v'doishpa. Is a yid allowed to tell a goy, muzzle my animal and thresh with it? That is the shayla. And Rashi again speaks out, disha shalach, your own disha. Mi arminon. And again, this is where Tosfos says, maybe it's even the yid's threshing. Mi arminon, do we say? Ki amrinon amiler il nachri shvus. Where do we have this concept that instructing a guy to do something for you is an Isur D'Rabbanan Hanamil in Shabbos? Maybe the whole concept of Amir al-Nachri only applies to the Isurim of Shabbos, the Isur Skila, because if you did it yourself, it would be an Isur Chomer of a Misa of Skila. Aval Chasimat Isur Lav, Chasimat, worst case, is only an Isur Lav, Loi, would not be so, Adam Loi Shna. Where this poses a little bit of a problem is on Yom Tov, where it's an Isur Lav, I think Amir al-Nachri is just as much of a problem. It's not an Isur Misa. So the Rishonim say, yeah, but it's part of that category of items that could be in Isur Misa. Tashma, Nachri Adosh b'parasai shal Yisrael. A Nachri that is doing Disha with a power of Yisrael, Einei over mishum bal sachsim. He would not be over bal sachsim. Of course, it means the Yisrael is not over. The guy is not over. It's mashma that he can't give him malchus for. But but it's not midarabon. He shouldn't be doing it. It's wrong. So you have a right to our shaila that a guy is not allowed. He's not allowed to let a guy do tisha with his animal. Really, the brayso doesn't mean to send out vibes that it would be usher. Really, it's the mutter. So really, the brayso could have said not einoi over. It could have said mutter lenachri lidash b'parasas. That's what it could have said. Why didn't it say that? The idea to turn the seifa, since there's a seifa to this brayso, where it says the Yisrael Adosh b'parasas shel nachri over, it used a parallel lashon tana reisha einoi over. Because on the seifa where we have to say there's an issue deraisa, if the Yisrael is doing disha, that's why I use the lashon of over and einoi over. Tashma, the shalchu lavu d'shmu. So I have to shut off the recording for just a minute because I have to tell you